This week on Behind the Pulpit, we are excited to be joined once again by Rachel.
That's right. Rachel Rickershauser is back on the pod.
The trio discussed some ongoing news stories.
And if you followed the news, there was some pretty horrific stuff that happened when Hamas went in, and people were just overlooking that. In fact, I just was hearing this morning there was a rally, I don't know if it's a rally, in London of 100,000 people that were supporting Hamas.
As well as a new one that has us scratching our heads a little bit.
There were some interesting wardrobe issues going on at the
Yes.
Dove Awards. Derek Webb showed up in a dress, and I'm not sure exactly what to even say about that.
After that, we interview some world partners.
Give you an idea that the distance from us, Vienna, the main city in Austria, to Kiev, main city in Kiev, is at the same distance as from Philly to Connecticut.
Yeah.
And imagine you would go home today and turn on the news and would say the Russian bombard Connecticut.
We answer one of your questions, and we reopen the door to Pastor Bob's sermon on Nehemiah chapters 3 to 5. As always, stay tuned for today's Theology Sprint. You're not going to want to miss this one.
I'll give it a shot, but I need some supplemental help.
Okay.
You want to try?
Oh, yeah, I was going to go first.
Oh, man.
Okay.
Let's do
Yeah,
this.
you got it.
I was
Like,
trying to
what
do
are
a phone a friend
You're
here.
just assuming I got to step up
No,
and save the day.
I was just, you know what?
No.
I apologize.
And wherever you may be watching or listening to this today, we hope you're having a wonderful day. And as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of Behind the Pulpit.
Hey,
Again.
guys. Here we go. Welcome to our Behind the Pulpit on Monday, October the 23rd. Is that what it is? 22nd?
23rd.
What
Why
day are we in?
don't you ask ChatGPT what the date is
Yeah,
today and
the
see how it
23rd.
helps you out.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's good to be with you today. We're here, as we always are, with Pastor Bob and Pastor Dave. But today we are joined by a very esteemed colleague to my left.
That's right. Rachel Rickershauser is back on the pod.
That's right.
On the
We had the
pod.
last time Rachel was on here, we had like some of the biggest numbers we've had on the podcast before. So our ratings were dropping. We had to bring Rachel back.
I guess that's
I'll
a
take the
sign.
compliment. All right.
Yep. So this is going to be a big one.
Save the day. Save us from cancellation.
Speaking of exciting things happening in the body, we're going to talk to you about a few things coming up in the life of our church. The first one is our Underground Sessions event that's going to come up pretty soon here, November 4th, 6:30 to 8:30. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence, AI.
Are we ever?
So if you have questions about that, or this is something that's affecting you, your workplace or ministry context, or just your daily lives, we'd like to talk about specifically how does that intersect with our Christian worldview.
Have you dived into some AI stuff? How's AI affecting your life, Dave?
I have an iterative relationship going on with ChatGPT.
Not a generative relationship, an iterative relationship.
We go back and forth. It's like Socratic. I ask questions, he answers whoever he is.
Says, well, yes, I can help you with that. In September of 2021, I found this.
What's interesting is when I have to tell him he's wrong, or her. I don't know. What do you say? Tell it it's wrong. It's like
let's not gender the ChatGPT.
And I try to
okay?
be kind. I'm like, isn't it also true that blah blah blah?
So you're arguing with ChatGPT.
He's like, actually, you're right. Here's 4, 5, and 6. I'm like, I'm not trusting you for anything. Sorry about that. So anyway, AI, that's coming up. The next event that's really important is our Stephen Ministry Adult Education class. That's going to be coming up for Sundays in November, so we hope you'll join us for that at 9 a.m. This is kind of a taste of Stephen Ministry. If you'd like to learn about the caregiving ministry at NBC, that's going to be an awesome time to just kind of whet your appetite. And it's like a little taste, a little glimpse, like when you go to Costco and you get like the little sample of the bagel or whatever they're selling there, and you're like,
it's always good.
yeah. So that's what that is. So if you'd like to be learning about Stephen Ministry and not ready to commit to the full-on 50-hour, 2-year training, Sundays in November, we'd love to have you a part of that adult ed class.
By the way, before you move on, that's good. Sign up for that. Regarding the Underground Sessions, a couple of the things I forgot to mention before. Number one, sign up and register so we know you want to come because we're going to feed you. And then secondly, we are relaunching our Underground Sessions podcast. That's going to be here on the YouTube channel. Our first episode is going to be dropping on Saturday. I interviewed Hawk Ing, the very famous Hawk Ing, about AI. So if you want to know the basics of AI before you come to the event, this Saturday, check out the YouTube channel and you'll get a glimpse of that.
That's a great segue into what I also wanted to talk about, which is another podcast that we're doing here at NBC called The Fresh Wave.
Look at
and
that.
so if you want to check that out, the most recent episode, number 9, has dropped called Drink from the Cup.
What is Ben looking at right there?
I'm not
It's
really
like he's
sure.
like what's like there's like an animal behind Corey in that picture.
He looks a little too happy for it to be
I
a
know.
ferocious animal or something like that.
Isn't he talking about suffering? He's very happy with that.
Yeah.
Suffering by drinking Dunkin' Donuts.
I think
over
he's
there.
like, "Where's my cup?"
Yeah.
That's right, man. See, they're at Dunkin' Donuts, and he says these guys are late for their order.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a great show for you to watch as well. And then last but not least,
Subscribe to the
subscribe
YouTube
to
channel.
the Fresh Wave podcast, to the YouTube channel. We got all kinds of stuff
We
coming
just
out.
passed our 400th subsber, Tim, by the way.
Did we really?
401. That's right. After this
400.
one, after Rachel came back on, we're going to have 450 by the end of the day today.
I
go.
don't know about that.
Can we just have like confetti, just stock confetti?
I can try.
Edit that in later, okay?
We're almost there to our first play button. No, what do we need for those? Like
Yeah.
1,000 subscribers to get.
We need to have a crossover,
yeah.
Tim, by the way. You know, like in the Arrowverse, they have the crossovers. We need to have a Fresh Wave behind the pulpit crossover, because we were the one that started it. So then, the new guy comes.
I'd be very interested to see Felicity and Pastor Dave on the same
Ooh,
podcast.
yes.
Oh,
Let's get that
that'd be
happening,
good.
okay?
Oh boy.
Just give me a... Make sure you put that in the intro.
Got to gear up for that one. Felicity keeps me on my
All right.
toes.
Oh,
All
yeah.
right. So, hey, this past weekend, Rachel, we had an awesome event. Tell us what was going on at NBC Saturday.
Yeah, that's right. I wanted to just highlight our trunk or treat event. It was just a really great event. We've been doing it for probably, I think, 8 years now. And then recently we added in last year, in 2022, we started adding this special hour called the VIP Access Hour for families with special needs. And I really just wanted to highlight that because I don't know if everyone really knows the impact that we're having in our community. So we started it for an Easter event in 2022. So now for every Easter event we do and the trunk or treat, we have this hour before. So the event starts, but it's only for those families with special needs. And so, we started this because we were like, how can we, make these events more friendly for families who have special needs? And some of I have a sister with special needs. She's an adult now. So I have a heart for it. Many of our congregation have a heart for kids. And now, the kids become adults, right? So it's like...
They do have a tendency to do that, right?
right. So I was just so encouraged that this year, this weekend, we had more than we've ever had before. We had 8 families come to that hour. And it might not sound like a lot to you, but it is a lot. And each one of them, our volunteers got to interact with them. I got to sit down with several of the families and just chat with them. And then I think the best highlight was when one of the families came up to me and also came up to 2 other volunteers to say specifically, thank you. Just thank
Nice.
you for doing this hour for my daughter because it means a lot. And I think otherwise, I don't know if they would come to this event, to be honest, because it's too crowded. It's too overwhelming for those kids. So that's
Good.
definitely a win, a highlight for me. And then also just a couple other families during the whole event. One family's interested in Awana. One family's just talking about how her
Yes.
don't get me started on Awana.
How much time do we have, Tim? We go 2-hour episode right now.
And, I'll just have to say, too, that, we aren't really, promoting it a lot outside of our community. But, of course, if someone asks, oh, do you have a midweek program for kids? Of course I'm going to tell them about it. So, yeah, they're
Well, what's on
interested.
the internet is going to go everywhere. So we'll just make sure you share this part of the video.
Yeah.
Noah can do a short of that.
Yeah. And then someone else interested in just coming to church. A friend from NBC invited them to come to the event. She said her kids are starting to ask about God. They believe in God, but she doesn't have all the answers. So, that's why we do these events, for those types of stories.
That's right.
For the people who don't yet have a church home, we want them to find a church home. So.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your leadership on that. It was a really well done event and making a big impact. So
yeah, and not to
thank
mention
you.
all the amazing, volunteers who came and just helped make it happen. We had 17 trunks decorated, so that takes a lot of effort. I know from watching them do it. So shout out to them.
We were over at the welcome table, Dave more than me, welcoming people in, and
Lots of fun.
and they stayed even after they saw us.
Yeah, that's a win right there. Good job, Rachel. Thank you for all those who served and volunteered. And that's kind of a good segue to the next segment. That was in the news at NBC. Let's talk about in the news in a little bit more of a global sense. All right, we got a lot happening around the world.
I've heard there's some things in the news.
My goodness,
Pastor Dave.
Yeah,
some things that are forefront that just won't go away.
Yeah, where do we even begin? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
There's.
How about you begin? You sent me a text message the other day. Some craziness happening at the Dove Awards, right?
Okay, so
we talked about Andy Stanley's conference last week. We might as well bring this one up too.
Okay. If you were a part of Big Eva in the 90s or the 2000s,
Eva.
then you probably have heard of Caedmon's Call, somewhere around 03 or something.
Caedmon gave me a call back around that time too. Yeah,
somewhere around, I don't know, 03, 04. The lead singer, Derek Webb, kind of went out on his own and started producing.
Was Caedmon somebody's name? Why was they Caedmon's Call? Do you know?
I'm not sure. That's a great question.
All right, Tim, ask ChatGPT and let's find out why it was called Caedmon's Call.
What do you want me to ask?
Why was Caedmon's Call called Caedmon's Call? Was there a Caedmon?
How do you spell Caedmon?
Caedman.
Yeah, we're curious about that.
All right, we'll keep going.
Well, while you're thinking about that, there were some interesting wardrobe issues going on at the Dove Awards as Derek Webb showed up in violation of the Torah.
I do have the answer.
Oh, tell us.
Great.
Tell us.
Caedmon's Call is a contemporary Christian band formed in 1993.
Well, we know that. Why is it called Caedmon's Call?
According to...
He's getting there.
My goodness. Now you knocked me off my rhythm.
Let me just keep saying Big Eva.
Is derived from a historical figure named Caedmon. Caedmon was an Anglo-Saxon poet. He is often considered to be the first known English poet. He lived in the 7th century and was a lay brother at the monastery of the Whitby Abbey in Northumbria, England. According to the Venerable Bede, an early English historian, Caedmon was a humble cowherd who had the gift of composing and singing religious poetry.
Wow.
Even though he had no formal training in poetry or music, he received his poetic inspiration in a dream.
Wow.
And the story is often seen as a symbol of divine inspiration for creative arts. The band Caedmon's Call likely chose its name as a reflection of their Christian faith and a nod to the idea of inspiration and creativity. Much like Caedmon's poetic inspiration was believed to be divinely inspired. The name also carries a sense of tradition and history connected to their contemporary music.
More than I bargained for with that answer.
Traditions.
Thank you, ChatGPT.
Yeah, that's my friend right there. There you go.
There you go. All right. Anyway.
What an amazing companion you have. So there were some interesting wardrobe issues with Derek Webb at the Dove Awards. And, we're told in the scriptures that we're to respect the binary of male-female, that God has created us in his image and intentionally not dress like each other. But Derek Webb showed up in a dress, and I'm not sure exactly what to even say about that. But the Dove Awards have come a long way since Michael W. Smith
and Stephen
won.
Curtis Chapman won regularly.
Yeah. So that's what we're dealing with in Big Eva. It's all the scandal this weekend.
It is. Yeah. All the rage, I guess. Lots of Twitter comments or X comments on that, I suppose.
Right. So the next thing that's happening, where should we go next?
I was only going to go one place, but can I go someplace? Then you can bring me back to wherever you were going to go.
Sure.
All right. So we're coming back. We've been talking about the Israel-Hamas war the last couple weeks. Mentioned it a little bit in the sermon this week. Things haven't super progressed as far as the Gaza front. I think Israel's waiting to go in. There's been an opened front with Hezbollah in the north. In fact, they've issued a travel advisory. They want people that are U.S. citizens to evacuate from Lebanon. We actually have a couple folks around that area, and so we need to be praying for Israel and for that whole situation. But the thing that I wanted to bring up was that it's just still interesting to me about the response to this. And somebody came up to me yesterday was saying, after Ukraine, after the Black Lives Matter, after all that stuff, everybody was posting stuff on social media, and it's really interesting to see how very few people are posting things about Israel after this event happened. In fact, I just was hearing this morning there was a rally. I don't know if it's a rally in London of 100,000 people that were supporting Hamas in the midst of this thing. And if you follow the news, I mean, there was some pretty horrific stuff that happened when Hamas went in, and people were just overlooking that, and that's a bit concerning.
Unconscionable. I read the report from the medical area in Gaza after that massacre, and I couldn't really read the whole thing. It was so disturbing what had occurred there. So to not see that as an act of violence, an act of oppression that's not worthy of condemnation, seems like we're in a different place in our culture, and I think a sad place. Looking at it from the Christian worldview, we would say that the answer to animosity from two groups like this is found in Ephesians chapter 2, that only Christ has brought the two and made them one. Only Christ can break down that dividing wall of hostility. And in Christ, through his Spirit, because of his blood, because there's only one blood, because there's only one baptism, because there's only one way of salvation, the two groups can become one. And our hope is in Jesus. Until then, we live in a fallen world, and we ought to cry out for justice and certainly pray for wisdom for our leaders. There's not an easy path out. This is a vexing turmoil that has been going on for centuries, maybe millennia, and we're things are getting heated up in our time. So pray for Israel. Pray for those who are innocent in Palestine, who are just bystanders as part of this conflict.
Egypt has blocked their way out to get into Egypt from the south, and it's just terrible.
Right. Yeah. So continue to pray for that very difficult situation.
Okay. Did you have another thing you want to mention?
That was good. I think that was what I was going to talk about.
All right, good. Yeah. Well, speaking of world issues, one of the things that we're going to institute this week, and maybe this will happen a little more often, we had some world partners, our missionaries who came and visited us yesterday, Bern and Patty, who've been with us for a long time. I can't say their last name because actually, speaking of artificial intelligence, he said artificial intelligence has the ability to search and connect you with people. And there's been times where their last names have been put out on the internet, and Christians in other countries faced repercussions of that. So Bern and Patty, working with Trans World Radio, I can say that. And I think you'll enjoy this interview that I did with them on Sunday morning. So why don't you check this out before we continue on with the rest of our podcast today. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Pulpit Extra Edition today. This is something new we're doing, and we're going to start because periodically we're going to have some special guests that come in that might not be able to show up on a Monday for when we normally do our recording, but it's really important that you get to meet them. So if you don't know, as a church, we really value supporting missions, especially overseas missions, and periodically we have some of our world partners, that's what we call missionaries, come in and share a bit about what's happening in their ministries. And so I'm privileged today to have with me Bern and Patty. So,
Good morning.
Welcome.
Morning.
So glad to have you guys here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We're actually doing this on a Sunday morning before you're going to be interviewed in the service. So thanks so much for getting up early and being here today, and then you're heading out, so you're not able to be here tomorrow. But I thought maybe you could just introduce yourselves for those that are watching that don't know who you are.
Yeah, my background is I'm coming from Germany. I'm by trade an electronic engineer. During my time on the university, I got in contact with real born-again believers. I gave Jesus my life. After 2 semesters studying electronics. And as a result of it, I had a question, how can I serve as a Christian? And I didn't see that it is possible to serve as a Christian, as an engineer, but God told me that and proved to me that it's possible. So 40 years TWLBR in engineering and still going.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Jersey girl.
Really?
Yeah, I was raised here just around the corner.
And you said I got to escape I guess you'll say where you are, but to Europe.
Yeah, went to Houghton College, and there I heard about Trans World Radio from a roommate whose sister and brother-in-law were on the field, and I was moved at that time. I had felt all along from the first time that I became saved that God had something special for me. He put his finger on me and took me to the side and said, I have something for you to do. So I went with Trans World Radio. I served first on Bonaire. It's a small island in the Caribbean.
Okay.
And then I was wrestling with the Lord. I wasn't so sure that I wanted to do that alone. I knew it would be tough for me, but the Lord, if you arm wrestle with the Lord, He'll always win. So you have to be.
I've heard that. I've experienced that.
So in that, He asked me a number of questions. I said, well, I want to be married, and I want a nice station wagon and a nice house, with curtains in the kitchen window and things. So He said, okay, well, let's say I give you that. Let's say I give you a husband. Are you going to go now? Well, I kind of wanted a station wagon. Well, okay, here's a station wagon. Are you going to go now? And a little house with curtains and with a picket fence. Okay, I'll give it to you. You want to go now? Yeah. Oh, some children would be nice. Okay, here you are. You want to go now? And I realized, when I said, well, I just got the house and the car and the kids and all this stuff. And He said, how long will you wait to serve me when I've called you? And I could not give an answer that held water. And so he laid that very strongly on my heart to go. And then I went, and then I wound up then in Monaco, Monte Carlo, with Transworld Radio. And the rest is history. Then I met my husband there, and we've had our children there. And
not in the casino.
Not the casino, no. But the neat thing...
You called me up. I didn't know there was a casino there. So thank you for clarifying.
But the neat thing was we did get a station wagon. We did. I did get my little curtains in the window. We did, have our children. And the Lord is very, very
He is good. He's good. He does things even in ways that we don't expect.
That's correct.
So you mentioned Transworld Radio. For those that don't know what it is, that's the organization you've been serving with. Could you tell us a little bit about who they are and what they do?
Yeah, Transworld Radio originated actually in 1956, and from 1958 on, we transmitted from Morocco, northern Africa, into Spain. It was the time when the Franco regime had closed the country for missionaries. So we tried shortwave. We learned a lot of lessons on the technical part to do this well. And then TWI expanded over the years. Radio Monte Carlo was our station for many, many years exclusively. In the meantime, we are all over the world on shortwave, medium wave stations. But with the digital world, we are on any media you can think of. Like your church expanded from when we were first here. Now it's high tech, also high tech support.
We are high tech.
Yeah, and we do the same. When we did the same, you can find us on social media, on the internet. You can find that content on SD cards, on MP3 players in Africa, on wind-up radios because they cannot afford the batteries. And whatever possibility is, we are trying to get the gospel out on the different means to specific audiences. Yeah,
that's exciting. So now you've been on the field for quite a while.
Yes.
And unfortunately, this is the last time you'll be visiting us as missionaries with Transworld Radio, right?
Church, yeah.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how were things different with Transworld or just missions when you started till today? I imagine things have changed a bit since the time you first went out.
I think one of the things is the fact that when I first went out, and that was in the 70s, it was thought of more long-term, that you would be there for a long time. And many said, okay, I'm going until the Lord calls me home. Now you see a lot more young people coming for 2 years, maybe 2 months. There's a lot of short-term. And that is excellent. They get a good taste for what's waiting them on the field, what they need to see if God is really calling them there. At the same time, we need long-term people, and I think Bern can speak of the.
It is we recommend for a church to look through the people they have, the local people in their churches, find out who could be suited for it. Patty calls it. You need 3 qualifications. You need a good, solid Bible knowledge. You need your profession having done well. So anybody who is still studying, finish it well. The Lord will use it. And the third one is learn how to get along with people, because missionaries are very strong-minded people.
Strong-headed people.
You
get a
have
bunch
to be
of them
to be
together.
on the mission field, right?
Yes, and then send them out for short term, 3 to 6 months, and they will know after the 3 to 6 months whether the Lord is calling them long term. But I also would like to mention, since we're on this topic, when we were here in 2017, we said that in the next 10 years, 1/3 of the long-term missionaries worldwide will retire. We are 6 years into this. We can see in our announcements in TWR that almost every month a long-term missionary retires now, including us soon.
Right.
So we need urgently also the long-termers again, because you cannot sustain an organization on short-termers. You need the long-termers to keep it stable.
Yeah. That's a good feel. I think a lot of times younger generation, they don't want to commit to anything for a long term. So that's a good exhortation for us today. So you I don't know if you mentioned, but you guys are currently in Austria, right?
Correct.
And that's close to Ukraine. So have you seen any impact from the Ukraine war in terms of how ministry has been going over there?
Yes, we can say, to give you an idea, that the distance from us, Vienna, the main city in Austria, to Kiev, main city in Kiev, is at the same distance as from Philly to Connecticut. And
really?
And imagine,
that put things in perspective.
Yes, and imagine you would go home today and turn on the news and would say the Russian bombard Connecticut.
Hartford, Connecticut is just getting bombarded.
Yes, imagine that. You would drop off your chair, when you turn your TV on. But that's life for us when we are over there.
Yeah, we have had quite a number of Ukrainian refugees coming, mostly women and children, small children, and the churches are just taking them in. A lot of individuals are taking them in, but they want to go back. Their homes are there. Their fathers, their husbands, they're there. They're just completely open-ended, and which makes the gospel a much safer avenue to be seen, to be looked at. So I have nothing left, but I have Jesus.
Yeah, we have found out that. By our national partners staying. The people stayed in the Ukraine. Actually, the head of our national partner is called occasionally to dig trenches for the soldiers on the front line. So he uses that opportunity to witness to them. And we found out the greatest help at the moment is a program called Testimonies. And so testimonies from Ukrainians for Ukrainians. And that is watched up to 2 hours. Even so, we learned nobody watches more than 5 minutes at a time on the internet. That they watch for 2 hours.
5 minutes seems long to me.
Yeah. They get hope from that, and because of that, they do. And we have a great testimony from an atheist.
Yeah, we got a letter from an atheist, and he put it flat out there. I'm an atheist, and but I love the programs that I'm hearing. I don't stop doing this. If I ever find you, I will hug you like you were my own family, and I will be your friend forever. And that's from somebody who says, nope, God's not for me.
Yeah, well, that's always moving stories to hear what God's been doing on the field. Well, since this is your last time stopping by here, do you have some parting words from Millington that you like to share? Encouragement for anybody?
Yes, absolutely. It's very difficult to say thank you. Not difficult to say it, but what does those words mean? For all of the years that you have been behind us with prayers and letters and support, thank you just doesn't seem to be enough. And I was just reminded of a particular portion in Scripture where David comes back with his warring men and finds their camp has been taken. And he says, okay, guys, let's go get our wives and our children and our goods back. And some of the men said, we just can't go. We're just too exhausted. Okay, stay there. He goes out. He gets their women, their children, and their goods back untouched, plus the bounty of the Amalekites, and brings it back. And on the way back, he says, the people who stayed with the stuff and the people who went down, the men who went down to fight the battle, they will share alike in this bounty. And when you consider the bounty being souls of people, to know that those who have sent those missionaries out will have the knowledge of those same people coming and saying, thank you, because of you, because you sent them out, because you kept them encouraged and on the field, I came to Christ through the radio or through the whatever means it was. And that's the bounty that we share alike. And someone may come up to them in heaven someday and say thank you directly to them for that.
It's like a coin, you know. We are the ones on the front on one side of the coin, and the churches behind us are the other side of the coin. It doesn't exist without the two sides.
Right.
It's impossible.
Yeah,
so
it's a partnership.
Yeah, and the sharing is not only is in the rewards. The sharing is identical. It is not that we deserve anything better or whatever.
No.
It is equally between church and between us, being an extension of the church.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being an extension of the ministry that God is doing here, over in Austria and throughout Europe, and really with Transworld Radio around the world, even for you, in terms of what's happening.
Right.
So thank you for your service, and may God bless you.
Thank you.
Know,
Thank
your
you
next
for
endeavor.
having stood behind us all these years.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, maybe one last thing. So what's next? What are you gonna be doing? You're staying in Austria?
We stay in Austria because our children have married Austrian girls, and we have Austrian granddaughters.
Okay.
So yes. And
But you told. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
And we would like to learn Hebrew. Patty has started it already. I will catch up hopefully once my retirement comes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
It's exciting.
Well, you told me they gave me an invitation to go over and visit them. I said maybe on my next sabbatical, and I have to go because you told me the actual Walt Disney Castle is over not far from you, right?
That's right. It's in Bavaria.
In the Munich area.
The real Walt Disney Castle.
Neuschwanstein.
Yeah.
Which, going back to my roots, my family's from that area.
Yes.
So, all right, great.
Yes.
Well, Bern, Patty, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
And to God be the glory.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
To God be the glory.
All right, back to you guys on Behind the Pulpit.
All right. Hey, thank you guys very much for tuning into that important interview. And now we're going to go to our questions segment. You always have the opportunity to submit questions to Behind the Pulpit. And we have a great question that came in this past week. So let's address that.
Yeah, so we got a longer question today. I think it's pretty interesting.
Did that fit on one slide?
I got it. I had to put the font down a little bit, but we made it fit. So I'll read that for you guys now. Even if Nicodemus did not know about or understand the necessity of new birth or being born from above, referencing John 3, 1 through 13, I doubt Nehemiah, Ezra, or most others in Old Testament Israel knew much about it either. Were those who were regenerated in the Old Testament aware that heart transformation was brought about by God, not just as a result of works, or did they believe they were justified by works without knowing about the underlying reality of justification by faith and the rebirth? If they believed in justification by works, perhaps it was more in the James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26 sense, where the works are the result or fruit of true faith, and not themselves meritorious. Not sure how well-known passages in Ezekiel foretelling regeneration were, such as Valley of Dry Bones in Ezekiel 37, or the verses about how God would remove hearts of stone and replace them with hearts of flesh.
That's such a great question. And it's
we really get these deep theological questions on our question time here.
We have some good Bible thinkers in our congregation that are connecting the right dots. So I happen to have brought my grandmother's Bible with me today for the podcast. This is a 1917 Schofield Reference Bible, and it's famous because there's a mistake in here that, well, I should say...
In the biblical text or in the
notes.
In the footnote.
Ooh, yes.
So a study Bible is when you have like a commentator or an author write notes underneath the line. Just remember, what's above the line is inspired, what's below the line is not.
There you go.
And people have tried to argue
above the
that
line,
maybe,
not below the line.
Maybe he didn't mean what many people think he meant here. Maybe there's a charitable way to say this. Anyway, it got removed in the subsequent editions. But he has a note on John chapter 1 where it talks about the law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ, that part of John 1. So Schofield said this: as a dispensation, grace begins with the death and resurrection of Christ. The point of testing is no longer legal obedience as the condition of salvation, but acceptance or rejection of Christ with good works as a fruit of salvation. So it seems like what Schofield was writing here is that there used to be a test of legal obedience as a condition of salvation. It seemed like that's the way many people read it, and it was revised because it didn't seem to be sound doctrine. So I don't think we want to say broadly, number one, I don't think we want to say that it was ever the case that anyone was saved by good works. Our good works, though they're necessary, are not meritorious toward our salvation. So I think we can all say that point blank. I think the second thing we want to say is that the Old Testament and the New Testament have what's called continuity and discontinuity. So some things are the same. Some things have shifted and changed as a result of being part of the New Covenant as opposed to the Old Covenant. The long answer to this question is found in Leon Wood's book, The Holy Spirit in the Old Testament. If you're interested in that, I would recommend picking it up. It's kind of a classic. This one's the older version with the yellow pages and everything. But I think what we would want to say is in terms of salvation or soteriology, everyone needs to be born again. Everyone needs to be regenerated, that our hearts are dead, that they're totally depraved, that we need God to quicken them, and God in his Spirit has to do that in all ages. Now, they didn't understand all the complications of the cross, the burial, and the resurrection, and Jesus the Messiah being God-man and taking on the penalty for the sins of the world on Golgotha in AD 33. Some of those details weren't fully revealed until Jesus came and made them clear, but they look forward towards this salvation. So right from Genesis 3:15, we have a promise, right? That the seed of the woman is going to come and crush the head of the seed of the serpent. And each generation had to place their faith in God's promised Redeemer and God's promise of redemption. It was pictured for a time through animal sacrifices that on a yearly basis, or even more than that in some cases, they would offer sacrifices as an atonement for sin, but that was only a covering, a temporary covering.
Or a shadow.
Talks about of things to come. Yeah. But that atonement was only really a picture, and the blood of bulls and goats, really, the book of Hebrews says, could not fully ever really atone for sin. So the perfect Redeemer had to come and had to offer the perfect sacrifice. So I'll turn it over to you, and then I want to read a verse out of the book of Romans. What do you think about
So
that?
I think the quick summary in terms of the subsequent question could be, well, how were Old Testament saints saved, right? And what you're getting at, to maybe a finer point on it, is that those in the Old Testament were saved by looking forward through promise to the cross. We, at this point in history, look back to the cross, but ultimately it is the cross and the grace of God that does save us.
Good. So here's a verse from Romans chapter 3, where Paul says, God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. So even the Old Testament saints were saved because of the blood of Jesus. That's what Paul makes clear in Romans chapter 3, though they may have only had a veiled concept of what that would be. So some of the Spirit's activity in the Old Testament was very consistent with the Spirit's activity in the New Testament, regeneration, indwelling. The Spirit is doing something new in the New Covenant, and I think the day of Pentecost speaks to the baptism of the Holy Spirit, the placing of the members into one body, the body of Christ, and how God is at work in the midst of all nations now, Jew, Gentile, and there's this explosion of the work of the Holy Spirit in the New Covenant. We would say that that's a new work that is treasured by believers under the New Covenant. That is something that we enjoy now that they looked forward to back then. So there's discontinuity and then there's continuity. That's a short answer, but the longer answer, check out this book. I think that will be helpful to you.
There you go. All right, good.
All right, so next, we're going to talk about the message from yesterday. So we are in...
can I just add something really quick
please.
from like kids ministry perspective? So yeah, like I would just mention too, that like even on Sunday mornings when we're working through the Old Testament with the kids, we do what's called a gospel connection. And so we remind the kids and we point like what you guys do in your sermons, right? So it's like we point them to Jesus. And we got a lot of questions about the animal sacrifices, and so explaining that like that was pointing out that they needed forgiveness from sin, but pointing ultimately to Christ later on.
Yeah, good connection.
I think it's important for kids ministry because sometimes we can read those tales as moral stories, as if we can learn lessons from them and then emulate those heroes in a way that doesn't lean on the power of the gospel and the Spirit in order to have fruit and works. But
in my opinion, that's not going to lead to heart change. I think that's like honestly partly how I remember learning those stories growing up, and so of course Holy Spirit can do anything, but I'm just saying I don't think it lends itself to heart change. Typically.
Well, and actually, that's some of the questions we've gotten about even going through Ezra and Nehemiah, where you have these characters, the historical characters, who are being put up as men of God, and yet they're flawed in some ways. So the challenge is we shouldn't, ultimately Nehemiah, Ezra, they're not the Savior, they're not the perfect one, only Christ is.
No, that was good. You made that really clear in one of the sermons. And yeah, I feel like I remember distinctly as a kid one day just realizing like, oh, like Samson did wrong here. Like this is like
Samson had a bit of a checkered past. That's true, yes.
So yeah, it's just important to teach the kids, like you said. This is not like we're leaning on them as our examples.
Samson liked the women. He did.
Yeah. So anyway, just want to put that in there.
Thank you. That's really helpful color to that question as well. So good. So let's talk about the sermon from this weekend. We were in Nehemiah chapters 3, 4, and 5.
Were we ever, Pastor Dave?
We're making some progress
there
in this study here.
The wall is halfway.
Building that wall.
Halfway through the wall.
I thought you were going to just bust out some Bon Jovi in the middle of your sermon.
I considered it, but then I thought better of
I heard you wanted to. I could hear that you really wanted to.
I did want to, I know, but then I thought John would make fun of me later on.
Shot through the heart.
Whoa! You halfway there. There you go.
That was halfway. We made it to the halfway mark. So,
halfway.
Bob, can you just kind of give us an overview of the passage and what's going on there in the biblical book?
Yeah, sure. I keep getting saddled with these really interesting 3-chapter assignments where the last chapter is this complicated mess that I get left with and wonder how am I going to land the plane. Last time it was, divorcing women. This time it was the wives were upset because they were selling their daughters into slavery to pay their debts, all because people were getting oppressed. But anyway, so the text, I think, does have a thread in that the central chapter 4, there's this major conflict where Israel is getting surrounded by their enemies, people that see Jerusalem as a threat. So chapter 3 is really about it goes through this whole list of people that built the wall. It gives you kind of a blueprint on how that happened. And we talked a little bit about how that was the mission, and we talked about why it was important that Nehemiah built the wall, and we said that was for their protection, but also to preserve the promise of the seed coming through the line. God's people had to be preserved. The second one was really about courage under fire, because then they're in the middle of the wall. There's this outside threat that's coming in, and all the people that were building with one hand, and they had swords on the other. They were preparing for battle if it came. From all these surrounding peoples. And then the third chapter, we talked about having compassion for those that are hurting, compassion in the midst of the crisis, because and I think this was a pretty important point of the text, that sometimes we can be so focused on the mission that we miss the people and the collateral damage around us. And so the collateral damage for building the wall was the fact that nobody else could work and do anything else, and that led to an economic crisis amongst the people, who were then being oppressed by their own people, and Nehemiah had to step up and say, no. And a major image we talked about through the sermon was the fact that walls were important for protection, but there's also doors in the wall. So how do you know when to open the door? How do you know when to close the door? That was a major thread that we talked about throughout, and there's some nuance to that. So ultimately, Jesus is the door. That's where we landed.
Very good. Well, thanks. It's hard to know how to narrow it down. There's a lot to talk about here. So you had mentioned that there's some opportunities for discernment regarding the door, and sometimes we extend, sometimes we invite, sometimes we, what was the third?
Restrict.
Sometimes we restrict. Can we talk about what would be some examples of when we would apply those 3 different principles? Maybe can you give us a short explanation of what those words meant?
Yeah, it was a good applicational principle to pull out. That's hard to mention everything in a message, but I would say there's really kind of 2 threads. When you think about a door can be opened, a door can be closed. So when do you open the door, when do you close it? And the first 2 principles that I mentioned there were open door principles. If you open the door, you can choose to invite somebody in and build a relationship that way. And as Christians, I think we should seek to do that as much as we can. but that's a vulnerability. So do you invite somebody in, or do you take the step of opening the door and going out, extending Christ's love to others? But there is a time, and this is the controversial part, there is a time, I think, to close the door and then to restrict relationships, things that you let in your life. The question is, when do you do that? Because walls are really kind of culturally vitriolic nowadays. You say if you're going to build a wall, build the wall.
That's a big word.
It's a big,
vitriolic.
Yeah, maybe ChatGPT can define it for us over there.
If Tim can spell it.
But yeah, people don't like the idea of walls. A lot of people. That's kind of to use another word, triggering for a lot of people. So I think doors might be a better image. It's the idea of when do you close it and not let certain things in. We looked at the Matthew passage, Matthew 10:16, where Jesus says, "I'm sending you out as sheep amongst wolves," right? And so you should be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. So there is a category of being shrewd, of knowing when to close the door, and what does that look like? So, were you looking at me to give further explanation of that, or should we discuss it together?
Well, I guess what was coming to my mind is discerning. The wisdom question is, when is it time to make those three decisions, right? So if somebody's coming and you can truly discern they have a humble heart, a contrite heart, they're really seeking, then it's time to open the door. It's time to invite. But if someone's coming specifically with their agenda to perhaps lead the sheep astray, perhaps bring in some kind of false doctrine or false teaching or damaging teaching or hinder or hurt the body, then it's time to exercise boundaries. And I think the New Testament would allow us to do that, right? So bolt the door on those people when it comes to that, because we have a responsibility to protect the flock from danger.
So let's maybe, I'm thinking about two examples here. So the first one, let's talk about church. We talked about the idea of part of protecting the sheep from the wolves is protecting against false doctrine, right? So we have to guard against false teaching coming in the church.
So, that comes up all the time. I mean, if we want someone to teach a class here, we're going to ask them to read our doctrinal statement, make sure they're comfortable with that, make sure they are in agreement with that.
In agreement to it, right?
And if they're not, if they want to footnote it or have a bunch of arguments about it, we're probably going to say, hey, you're welcome
we
here.
We love you, but you can't teach, right?
Right. And we'll say that with a smile on our faces, as nice as we possibly can, but we're going to want to protect the teaching of our church. I think that's part of our job description as pastors and staff here.
And same with, children's ministry, family ministry, so teens as well. We have certain restrictions to anyone serving with children.
We don't just let anybody get with the kids,
off
right?
the street can't just come in and serve. So
even if they say they feel called to serve with the kids.
No, sorry. You gotta
maybe not. We'll see.
Some signatures and some background checks.
Part of discerning the call or confirming the call is being willing to submit yourself to outside counsel and be affirmed by others.
Good. Well, the second example I was thinking was, we'll think about kids, little kids, not just kids ministry volunteers, but also parents. And I think that's a wrestling thing that people are having even more so nowadays. Is especially if my kid is younger, who should I expose them to? Whose house should I let them go to? What are they going to watch? What are they going to see? Is that person agree with everything that I'm convicted by based on the scripture? What media should I let them watch? What ideas should I let them be exposed to? I think there's a time to build relationships also, but I think even more so when they're younger, there's a time to restrict. And, we think about that pretty regularly. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's actually a calling of a parent.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so, I even just thought of school choice in general, because in a way,
education's another one, right?
You're like, closing the door, opening the door to certain things in the child's life if they go to a certain school. And so, I talk about this with my friends at church a lot lately. And, I just want to encourage people that, it's not like there's one right answer for some of these things. Some of them can be more clear cut, like the false doctrine point, but I think some of them it's like it's looking to God for the wisdom in your family.
Yeah, and that's where it requires discernment, because I mean, just to use the education thing as an example, that's probably a bigger conversation now than when I was younger and when I was going to school. Should I send my kids to the public school? Should I private school? Should I homeschool? That's a bigger conversation now than it used to be. particularly because I think when your kids are younger, like especially when they're like under like elementary school and they're more impressionable, some people use the argument, well, we're teaching them to be missionaries, but if they're they can't be missionaries unless they're formed first, right? So that's kind of the tension that gets raised up in people's minds, and different people have different convictions about that. But that's part of this. Like, when do you open? When do you close?
Yeah, I mean, on both sides of that, with parenting and friends and parties and social gatherings, it's like
your kids are older, man. How are you?
Yeah. I mean,
they just
some
come and go, right?
You kind of begin to turn those decisions over to them, right?
Right.
But when they're little and they can't handle that exposure, or that's just going to confuse them because they like this person, they're very young and they're just not ready to process something. Then you're going to shield them from that until they're ready. Not that everybody has to agree with everything I believe or I'm convicted by for me to have a play date or something, but. When it comes to longer time periods of exposure, I'm going to be more discerning as a parent.
Yeah.
On the other hand, prior to me being in pastoral ministry, I used to work for this organization, Aim for Success, where we would go to public schools and teach about alcohol and drug use or abstinence or bullying. We do school programs. And that was a great opportunity, not necessarily to preach the gospel there, but to provide a solid message about self-control, self-respect, and self-discipline. Sometimes kids would come up to me afterwards and be like, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" And I'd be like, "Shh, yeah, we're trying to open the door here and have an influence for good." And they give us that open door to do that. So we like to call ourselves sheep in wolves' clothing.
There you go.
So there's an opportunity there, I think, to have a relationship and keep the door open.
The discernment, right?
Right.
So that's for kids. Maybe we can think about an example for adults, kind of in the middle. Maybe you don't have little kids, but what would be another example of kind of this tension of the invite, extend, restrict, when you're kind of just an adult, a single adult, an older adult,
I think when you in the sermon were saying like even just certain relationships in general, that sometimes you need to put up boundaries. So I think that could apply to any adult.
Well, yeah, and I think, okay, so maybe just if you're a single adult, I think, dating relationships are big. So some people don't get out of relationships they should put boundaries up in because there's an emotional pull there. And those relationships can be very destructive, or if you're in high school, college, relationships are big. So there's a time to invite, but there's a time maybe to restrict.
Right. If there's unhealthy, reliances on someone.
Codependence. We tend to tolerate unhealth a lot, because it makes us feel good. Or, I mean, you're the expert counselor here. There's a reason that we run to those unhealthy relationships as they give us something we think we need.
Right. And that's when that's something I think I need, I'm going to have a harder time putting up the wall because I'm getting it from a broken well or a broken cistern. Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of like media consumption. I don't know if this is way off topic, but we might need to watch
right on target.
Watch what we're consuming, and it could be okay for you to consume something, and maybe not okay for me to consume something, just because I have a tendency to go too far with it. So that could mean things like on social media, or maybe your restrictions on what pops up as available for your Netflix menu, or you need to put walls up where you might have temptations to take advantage of certain media consumption that are not healthy for you.
Yep.
So walls and doors. It's a conversation that requires wisdom.
Yeah. Any other questions? Any other things that popped out to you?
I just really like the point on clarity of mission and just knowing what you're called to do and needing that clarity. So I thought it was really good.
Yeah, and I think when you have that, you get through those tough times and the conflict. If you don't have that, I think you give up quicker. So, yeah.
It's a good message. We're halfway there.
We are. We're going to finish the wall this week, though, right?
That's true.
Nehemiah 6, that's what's coming up.
Mission accomplished.
Make sure you get a big sign on the stage.
Yeah.
Can we do that, Tim? Get a big sign on the stage, mission accomplished.
So really quick, we had we did this walk through the Bible program with the kids a few years ago. So there's hand motions for all the major, points. So for Ezra, it's Ezra people, and then Nehemiah, you build a wall. So Nehemiah wall. So anyway,
knees.
You go for your knees.
Let's do that together. Knees.
Ezra
wall.
people.
All right.
because Ezra was building the people, right? And then Nehemiah walls.
built the wall. There you go. All right, do that.
How
Make
is
sure you
this
do that at
people?
home
I feel
today.
like this is chicken dance. Is this,
No, it's not chicken dance. This is
people.
It's like people. It's like, yeah.
Well, like
it's
you're
your
people, like me,
It's
like me.
yeah.
Oh, like pat you on the back. You're good people.
When I was in
Good game.
Oh, gosh.
back in my NBC children's ministry days, there was a video about Nehemiah, and they did like a spoof where they put the story of Nehemiah to Mamma Mia by ABBA. So it was Nehemiah built the wall again. That's all I remember.
Nehemiah.
That stuck with me
Just for the
years.
record, I was not involved.
No, Rachel wasn't there yet.
What? That's wait.
Speaking of walls and doors, I think we need some boundaries in our children's ministry media consumption.
Oh gosh, that's funny, Tim. I'm gonna have
All
to look
right,
that up.
so this is the part of our Behind the Pulpit podcast where we do a little theology sprint.
Roundtable sprint. We're going to
We've
do like
had
a
a
relay race right now.
Single laser, we've had double barrel. I think we're going to try triple barrel today.
That's true.
So
So
Because
since
Rachel really wanted to answer the question, but she said she needed a second and a third leg.
all right,
That's right.
Rachel. So for our listeners who are our biggest fans, you know that we've been trying to do our sort of like kid theology sprint. So we've had a couple of kid ask questions, and now we're taking a different sort of turn here.
I'll get my grandma's Bible ready.
Rachel, how difficult do you want this to be?
You can't ask me
From
that
a scale
question.
of 1 to 5.
You just gotta either like
You know,
bring
you
it
go-
on.
you go
no,
into,
and
like-
You want it kind
you
of
go to the
difficult
video
or like
store.
It's like hot sauce, like
Difficult?
mild, medium.
You go to the
Well,
video
like
store. It's
fire.
like
Really
beginner,
difficult.
medium, or expert.
All right, beginner, hard, or
I mean,
really
I
hard.
have the pastors right next to me, so you can bring it on, whatever you want to do.
Okay, I gotta pick one.
You assume that will be helpful.
Okay, let's
It's a big assumption right there.
Oh, God.
do we want to talk about relationships, euthanasia, or gender identity?
Oh, none of the above. I thought this was gonna be how to.
There's no softballs today.
Oh,
Euthanasia.
All
Let's
right.
do it.
Euthanasia.
Okay,
All right.
so
Bob.
how would
Bob's a little too excited about this one.
so today's theology sprint is, as a parent, how would you talk to your parents and sort of explain the idea of end-of-life issues such as euthanasia in the ways that it aligns with Christian beliefs about sanctity of life?
My goodness, this was in your lesson next week. You're ready to go.
Oh yeah, we talk about this all the time in children's ministry.
I'll give it a shot, but I
Yeah.
need some supplemental help.
Okay.
Okay.
You want to
Yeah.
try?
Oh yeah, I was gonna go first.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Okay.
Let's do
Yeah,
this.
you had,
I was
like,
trying to
what is
do a
it?
phone a friend
You're
here.
just assuming I got to step up
No,
and save the day.
I was just, you know what?
No.
I apologize.
All right, so euthanasia, I think the bottom line is you said sanctity of life. I think you need to teach dignity of life, like that. As Christians, our worldview, we believe that every human has value in their life from conception to death. And so we don't want to end that early because then that's showing that we're not valuing that person's life. And so, again, dignity, that's a big word, but you just remember the word value, I would say. It's like how God values each and every person, and so we need to value each and every person's life. And it's God who's the one who decides when that ends, and not other humans.
It's good.
I got nothing else to say.
I mean, I'll just supplement, but we don't
go
really
for it.
have to.
Go for it.
well, no,
Yeah,
we can.
so,
I think
I
we
mean,
can keep
I
going.
think-
I mean, there's nuance, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So
of course.
euthanasia used to just mean good death. And it's come to mean in our culture like helping somebody out the
Right.
door. And that's really not, I think, scriptural because it's a violation of one of the 10 Commandments. Do not murder. It's self-murder.
Yeah.
It's also a commandment that was given to Noah about protecting human life because we're made in God's image. So because of that, we don't support that. And so we would say when God calls us home, that's a decision that he's going to make through natural causes. It would be great if that was a really easy, cut and dry decision every single time. But oftentimes the human body starts to break down at various capacities. The heart, the kidneys, the lung. Sometimes there's cancer issues. So it's hard to decide when do I discontinue medical treatment for this and when do I continue to try time after time with hope against hope to preserve my loved one's life. And there comes a time through prayer, through wise counsel, where you decide that God's calling that person home. But I think you want to leave that decision with the Lord. the Westminster Confession also does speak to that. It says that, and comments on all the 10 Commandments, but it says part of keeping the commandment about murder is to not withhold life-giving treatment when it's in your power to do so. So we want to try everything that we can so that we can say, God, really, we've done everything that we can here, and nothing seems to be working, so we leave this matter into your hands. And that's a difficult decision. That's a decision you want to walk through with your spiritual friends, maybe the pastor in your life, maybe an elder, because that's not easy all the time. It's very difficult. And the good news about the Christian life is we have the hope of heaven, and we can enter into some of the most difficult times in our lives with great trust in God's promises. Yeah. I was really moved this year, guys, if you were following the events surrounding Tim Keller and his passing and how he was communicating at the very end. That was really special, how he was even tweeting out things like, there is no downside for the believer. Of course, he battled pancreatic cancer, and at the end, there was nothing more that they could do. But he ended his life with great hope in God's promises. And so what a great model for all of us.
Yeah, maybe another nuances I would add to is there's different scenarios, and I think you were pointing that out. So you have somebody at the end of life who maybe you're keeping them alive. If you somehow withheld this, then the doctors would tell you they would die. So how long do you keep somebody on a feeding tube or whatever when it seems like they're brain dead, or so there's that scenario.
Artificial means, so feeding tube, ventilating machine, permanent dialysis, even a machine that continues your heart. Those are unnecessarily prolonging perhaps what the natural causes that God is allowing to take place.
So there's that, but then culturally speaking, there does seem to be this fascination with this kind of culture of death. So like there was a really kind of well-known movie a few years ago called Me Before You, where the guy engaged in active euthanasia at the end, basically because he didn't want to suffer anymore. Like he felt like his quality of life was lower. And this is kind of speaking to a little bit more what Rachel was getting at, that at the end of the day, we should be valuing life and not being part of it's because we don't know how to suffer well in this world. We don't have good teaching on suffering. Any kind of suffering, especially in an American context, is seen as being a bad thing. So just because you suffer doesn't mean your life doesn't have value.
That's a good word.
Yeah. God, and the God of the Bible uses suffering for great good. And so we're not the ones to determine the value of someone's life. Only God gets to determine that. And so we trust him, that we're all made in his image, and it's our job to glorify him for as many days as he gives us.
Yeah. Good.
Well, that was more than a minute.
Might not have been a sprint, but it was a good half marathon.
You can do the sprint with Rachel, and maybe you can do a longer one. Yeah.
All right, 5K. Yeah.
Theological 5K today.
Well, I think we can start getting into this where, like, you have somebody who did the sprint, but then you could tag to the longer.
That's true.
This longer.
Yeah, but her sprint was perfectly good.
Sprint.
I mean,
she sprinted.
It was very high level, so yeah.
Well, that's what they are, right?
Yeah.
Maybe somebody will come on and say, "You don't know what you're talking about." This girl doesn't know what she's talking about.
I'll get the comments. Get the comments.
Commenters, please be gracious.
You can comment.
We're trying our hardest here.
I forgot to say image of God. Throw in image of God.
That's right. That's right.
Dave did.
All right. All right. Should we wrap this up, Dave? Man, we've been going.
Hey, thank you guys for tuning in. It's been always a pleasure. Behind the Pulpit. We'll see you guys next week for our next episode. God bless you.